remote learning lens. And our primary speaker today is Matt Ryan. He is the Assistant Director at the Spotted Zebra Learning Center. And as I said, Steve Oil, who is a parent peer advocate, will be available to present anything at the end, any questions from that perspective. Our flyer did say that Jennifer Sandshaw from Crossroads Center for Children would be joining us. She unfortunately has had something come up and will not be able to join us today. If you have any specific concerns or questions or anything like that regarding that, please let us know, and we'll do our best to address those and get that answered for you. Helen, is there anything from a technology perspective that I've missed?
If you need closed captioning, at the bottom of your screen, there should be 3 dots that say show subtitles or show full transcript, and that will provide closed captioning. Our 2 sign language interpreters today, they are both spotlighted, so you should be able to, they should be on everyone's screen. But if you want to take it a step further, you can pin them by hitting the 3 dots on their video and selecting pin. And other than that, we are set to go.
Excellent. So at this point, we're going to turn things over to Matt Ryan. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Kristen. I appreciate the introduction, and I want to thank the task force for inviting me to come on here today. I just want to tell everybody a little bit about myself before we get started. I've actually been working in early childhood education since 2003. In 2005, I started working at the Spotted Zebra Learning Center, which is an integrated preschool program in Albany, and I've been working there ever since. And I've been fortunate enough to work here at this program, but also have some personal experience. Both of my sons actually have IEPs. So I've been both a classroom teacher. I was never a special ed teacher. I was always an early childhood teacher, but I've worked with special ed teachers since 2005. So I've had classroom experience, but I've also had personal family experience being the father of children with needs. So I've been on kind of both sides of this whole remote learning school during COVID experience. And I just want to kind of put out there, this is the either second or third kind of group, group training with adults that I've done since this started. And if anything doesn't work, just take that as like a meta commentary on on COVID and how it's all going. But yeah, so I just wanted to give you a little bit of a background to give you a sense of where I'm coming from, because I think that, you know, my experiences inform how I have interpreted what's been going on. And that's just a little bit of context for what we're going to talk about today. And then Helen's going to help me with the presentation. So I'm going to occasionally say, Helen, we can go to the next slide. So Helen, we can go to the next slide, please. So one of the things I like to do for any training or any conference or anything is kind of identify for both myself and for you goals I want to get out of this presentation. So I want to identify principles and concepts to effective remote learning, identify challenges that are faced by both the providers and the caregivers, and to kind of use our principles and concepts to evaluate all of those potential challenges for kind of the best resolutions we can hope for. So I like to create a framework to look at things. Again, it's I guess it's like from years of working with IEPs, it's like I like to create goals and then look at everything through those goals and work from there. In fact, you're going to hear me say goals a lot today because I kind of feel like that is in a time of confusion, it's good to have a focus of what we want to do. So that's going to be one of the main themes of today, is coming back to, you know, the goals for each different piece of what we're working on. So Helen, you can go ahead to the next slide, please. So before we get started, I want to just kind of make it clear, and I'm assuming most people on this call will agree, that generally speaking, services provided in person are more effective and more productive than when we're doing them remotely. And there's a lot of different reasons for that. I think not the least of which is that that's kind of how we've all been trained to do it. So, you know, everybody's kind of back to being a first year teacher or therapist or professional. So there's that whole learning curve. I remember when I first started teaching, I wasn't very good at it. So you know, we're all kind of in that boat again. And then as parents, we're kind of, now we're all at the very least teachers' aides. So we're all in this this new space together. Absolutely, I'm not saying that all, you know, that we should ignore the dangers of what's going on right now. Absolutely, in any case, safety always is going to be our number one concern. You know, we'll go back to our hierarchy of needs. Like, if we're not feeling safe, we're not going to grow. So we want to make sure that everybody is safe. But when services are able to be provided safely in person, that's generally speaking going to provide the best outcome. And I just want to make sure that, you know, as I'm talking through here, that is always in the back of my mind, that I can't wait till we can do this all in person again. So yeah, I just want to make sure that's clear before we get started. Okay, we can go to the next slide, please. So here are going to be our guiding principles that we're going to go through today. I'm not going to be so full of myself to say that these are all you need to know, but in my experience on both a you know, professional and personal end, these are this is feedback that I've gotten through my work, and this is feedback I have given as a parent. So the kind of the four guiding principles and concepts I want to look at are, again, being goal-oriented. 2 is creating realistic benchmarks for input and output in terms of, you know, and I'll go into more detail about this, but when we are setting ourselves up and we're making these goals, let's be realistic about what we have available to us and what we can put into it and what we can take out of it. The next step would be fostering solution focused thinking, in terms of there are problems that are inevitably going to come up, and the attitude we want to take towards them is to be solution focused rather than problem focused. And then the fourth is engaging in productive reflection. As far as I know, we will have both parents and professionals on this call, and these are 4 things that I think everyone needs to do to make this as productive a time as possible for our children who are receiving these services. Okay, so we can go to the next slide. So being goal oriented. So when I say that, I think about the fact that, like, the more moving parts a system has, the more efficient each of those parts have to be. And being efficient means you know what you're supposed to do. I like mantras and scripts and saying, so I think all the time about goals are our guides. So if we don't know what we want to do, how do we know how to get anywhere? You know, so we need to have an idea of where we want to get to, and that will inform each step we take along the way. We can go to the next slide, please. So what I always like, and I read this is, I didn't make this little saying up. I read it somewhere years ago, but I love it. It's, you know, you have to ask yourself, what are my goals? What are my behaviors? Do my behaviors match my goals? So for providers, you want to make sure that we're being clear each session what we're working on in relation to the IEP, and communicate what materials will be necessary to do that. When I have participated in remote learning with my boys, the ones that are the most successful are the ones where either there's an email the day before that says, we need, make sure you have X, Y, and Z, have your scissors ready, have your glue sticks ready, have, have a board game ready so we can play a speech game, that kind of thing. Making sure parents are aware, or any of the caregivers are aware of what we're going to be working on, is going to be key to making this session successful. Because otherwise, there's enough, like kind of we said, there's a lot of moving parts, and we want to control what we can control. We can't always control how well the technology works. We can't always control the interferences that might come, but we all are putting our efforts into planning our sessions. So let's share that with our families. Caregivers, you want to make sure that you are aware of what materials you need for this session, have them ready beforehand, and easily accessible to the student throughout the session. We at our house, we had kind of made, since we had, sometimes, because my wife is also a teacher, so sometimes we had multiple multiple screens going all at once, and so everybody had like their little box. And we had, for my younger son, it was, crayons and scissors and glue sticks, and for my older son, it was whatever book they were working on, and then for my wife, it was a whole different thing because she teaches high school and I don't even get that. So but we want to make sure that the things that we can control, we are, and if we all know what the goal of the individual session is, then we can all be participatory in that, and we'll know what tools we need in that individual session. Can we go to the next slide, please? So my pro tip. I was trying to be clever. I didn't know what else to call it. So little hiccups I've seen along the way is, as professionals, we are thinking in jargon a lot, and sometimes we communicate in a way that isn't necessarily how regular people speak. Like, while to you, sending somebody an email that says, today we're going to work on bilateral coordination, to me, I'm like, I don't know what that means. So we want to make sure that we're going to state very clearly, whether it's something as simple as we're going to work on producing L sounds, or we're going to work on, strengthening your grip, or, being able to cross your hands over each other. We want to make sure that we are explaining very carefully what it is that we're doing, and explaining in a way that it's actually meaningful to whomever we're talking to. For our caregivers, we also, so as a parent, we have to recognize that for the first few sessions, we might just need to have the goal being to establish a rapport and a rhythm of what these, whether it's Zoom or Google Classroom, whatever, we'll have to kind of get that rapport going, and that honestly, that happens in person too. It's just is a little easier because you're right there and you can manipulate whatever tools you have, across the the internet. It's not as easy. One of the things I like, a story I think of a lot that kind of makes me laugh, of kind of getting lost in the moment a little bit, is that when there's extra steps to anything, it's very easy to forget the simple stuff. I heard a great, and Steve, you might have even used this analogy once, when you're learning to drive, if you've only ever driven an automatic car, and now you're trying to drive a stick shift, all of a sudden you're blowing stop signs. Not because you forgot what a stop sign is, but because you're so busy doing this over here that your body hasn't fully processed and absorbed the new information of, oh yeah, wait, I got to stop at the stop sign too. I always tell people the story of when my older son transitioned from early intervention to CPSE. I actually, and this is like, this is embarrassing to admit now, like I forgot to ask what the frequencies of some of his services were. And like my role at my job is to be like that detail guy. But because even though I spoke the language, you know, like I know the jargon, I was so preoccupied with just the, you know, the acceptance that I was going through and whatever, you know, part of the process of being a parent in that situation, I forgot like the most basic thing. I came out of the meeting and somebody's like, well, how often does he get PT? And I was like, I don't know. I don't know. So, you know, that kind of stuff, it's always kind of reminded me that, you know, whenever you add in a new step, like you have to adjust for it. I hope that makes sense. Okay, let's go to the next slide, please. All right, so creating realistic benchmarks. So now that we know we need to set goals, how are we going to set those goals? Number one, we have to be honest about what access we have to things. We have to be honest about what our skill sets are. We have to be honest about, you know, how much we are able to put into these different sessions. And we also want to be incremental in our goal setting. You know, kind of like I said before, the first couple of sessions, maybe it is just developing a rapport and a rhythm over the computer. All of that is important and it matters. You have to build a strong base before you can start building up on anything. It's important for all of us to be honest about what we have access to in our homes, and it's important for us providers to you know, meet our families where they are, make sure we are getting them whatever support is available to them. And as families, it's up to us to be honest. Like I struggle very much. Like my kids come by their needs very honestly. Like I struggle with fine motor tasks. So my wife would usually do the OT stuff because that wasn't, you know, I can't cut in a straight line. So I'm like, how am I gonna help this kid? You know, so so we were very honest about that. Like, you know, this is something that I struggle with. And we were able to kind of adjust accordingly. That's something that is going to be important to these relationships being functional. Can we go to the next slide, please? I think context is very important. Nothing happens in a vacuum. So everything requires a larger scope of context. So for both our caregivers and our providers, we need to know our limits. Our children will be most successful when we all work our hardest, but within our capacity. So if you are a provider, but you haven't, you know, you're just kind of freewheeling it all over the place and you haven't set up a schedule that works for you as a professional, then you're not going to get anywhere. You're eventually going to become overwhelmed. If you are a parent that is struggling with a particular modality or a particular session or a particular concept, like you need to be honest with your provider and find ways to help you access that better. Whenever we hire somebody at our school here, the first thing we always do is we read our mission statement. And our mission statement here specifically talks about growth of our children, our students. What I like to do is expand that a little bit and talk about there's 3 different places where we can grow. Obviously, we want our children to grow. We want our caregivers and families and their support systems to grow. We want ourselves to grow as professionals. So we want to get better at all of this. And the only way we can do that is when we recognize where a problem is. I'm very fond of the concept of raising your 85%. This is a concept that they use a lot in sports. So like if you were to go out and just do 100% all the time, you would redline and you'd make progress for a while, and then you stop because you weren't actually recovering. Like I can remember a while back when everyone know Usain Bolt, the sprinter. He was getting ready for the trials to go to the Olympics, and he was just winning his matches. He was doing just enough to qualify for the next round. And there was a lot of buzz about like, oh, he's lost it. He doesn't have it anymore because he's not going as fast as he was. And then he got to his Olympic trials and boom, he's the fastest man on the planet. That's because he had raised his minimum to a point that it was higher than everyone else's maximum. So keeping your 85% going. So if your 85% goes up, your 100% goes up kind of naturally. So finding those things that are difficult or a struggle and working on them is very important. I also think, again, another kind of funny story about context, and this goes back a little bit to the piece about, being careful about speaking in jargon is a few years ago, I was having a conference with a parent, and she was very concerned about the assessment that we had done on her child. And one of the pieces that came up was, it talked about phonological awareness, and she thought it meant understanding the telephone and what that does, and the pieces that does. So we had a whole conversation where we were talking about two different things, because I was talking about phonics and she was talking about telephones. And it took us a while to circle back around to like, oh, we're talking about two different things. And then we were able to get on the same page and see, this is what we want to talk about. This is what we want to work on with that child. Hope that makes sense. So that we always want to, like I said, work our hardest, but within our capacities. We can't do more than we're able to do. Okay, we can go to the next slide. So like we said, caregivers, be honest about your resources, skills, and comfort level with assignments, and give productive feedback to your providers about things. And I use that word productive purposely. Nothing short circuits communication faster than "this was bad" or "this stinks." Be like, "This is where I saw the struggle," or "This is not keeping my child's attention because of X, Y, and Z," or "This is." So these are very specific things that we can focus on and actually plan for. And so the providers, it's our job to absorb that feedback and adjust our plans accordingly and realistically. So if we had one session where it was a group, it was my son and another child, and we were trying to get a kind of a back and forth going. It was kind of almost a social skills developing group. And once we were warmed up and into it, it was really good. But that was like 10 or 15 minutes into the half-hour session. And so the special ed teacher started doing this thing where at the beginning of every session, she would have a different hat on. It just sounds great. But both kids got so excited about what the new hat was going to be that they were instantly engaged. And it's one of those funny things that it didn't really cost or anything, and it didn't actually take up any extra time. It actually really fed well into whatever they were doing, because then she would start wearing a hat that was related to whatever the project was that we were working on, or the book we were going to read. And that really just kind of slid nicely into what that session was going to be for that day. Now again, this all sounds great right now, and I understand the hardship of doing it in the moment. And that's why that productive feedback and that productive feedback loop is important, because if you are feeling like overwhelmed, this is too much, or I don't know if this is working for them on this day, we have that trust and that honesty built up, and we can build from there. Okay, I think we can go to the next slide, please. Excuse me, I need a drink of water. Okay, finding solutions. as if you guys haven't already experienced this, problems will arise with remote learning. It's important to approach these problems with that concept of being empty of blame. We don't, like I said, we're all back to our first year of teaching all of a sudden, and parents and caregivers are all back to it being in a role that we've never possibly had to play before. We are very lucky. I live in a house of educators, and we struggled with our providers, and like some of our providers work for me. So it's like, so it's like that's an extra piece. So being able to be solution focused is important. So we want to think proactively and creatively about how to solve problems, and success is always going to be measured by how well we've met our goals. Again, we know we have to establish goals. We've talked about how we're going to establish them, and then we're going to refer back to those goals to see if they were realistic, if we're going to meet them, what we need to do to meet those goals. And the thing that's going to grind that to a halt more than anything is starting to assign blame. Whereas you don't understand my kid, so you don't do this right, or you're not following through with whatever it is that I want you to do. I think we've all heard that concept of behavior is communication. When we are reacting to the frustration of this situation that we're in, we need to kind of recognize that and own that, and refocus ourselves, instead of getting stuck on what the problem is focus on what we can do. So if we can go to the next slide, please. This is another kind of concept that is like, it's a little bit harsh, but it's important to kind of remember. So like, if there's no solution, there's no problem. So we don't always have control over right now whether or not we are in remote learning, let's say, and we don't have an abundance of choices right now. Some of our problems therefore can be workshopped and solved. So for example, access to computers. I know a lot of districts are saying, if you don't have reliable access to the internet or to a computer, contact your school district and they'll support you in that way. Some schools are giving teachers the option of either doing remote learning from their home or from their school building. That there are certain things that we can workshop to make things work as best as possible, but it all requires some flexible thinking. So that along with the flexible thinking, we need to have that mutual respect. And so what that means for our caregivers is, you are the expert of this child. You can use your knowledge of this child to inform how the sessions can meet their needs while respecting the role that the provider plays. So, I know my child responds very well to X, Y, and Z. How does that look in the context of a remote PT session? For providers, you are the expert in your content area. This is a time where you're going to have to kind of stretch your boundaries a little bit. Everybody's got to get a little bit more creative. And we want to respect the role of the caregiver in knowing their child, particularly if this is a child that, hasn't had the chance to have face-to-face meeting with the particular professional yet, that maybe session started after someone had to be quarantined or their program was shut down. All of these things are frustrating and they are impediments, but they can be managed with our ideas of flexible thinking and mutual respect. That the providers are going to look at the caregivers as the expert on this child, and our caregivers have to look at the providers as the kind of experts in their content area. And so what they say is going to matter, and we want to follow through with what they are recommending. We can go to the next slide.
Matt, before you jump onto the next slide, can I just ask you to give a little bit of clarification? You had mentioned something about it being empty of blame. I'm wondering if you can explain more about what you meant by that and who that refers to.
That's great. Yes. So, and there's a little bit of this on the next slide, I believe, but it is that it is being empty of blame across the board. So we want to give ourselves a little bit of slack first, kind of like we were talking about. This is a new situation for everybody. We are not going to be experts on it right away. By being goal focused, we can get better. But if if you have never been in a situation where you have to sit with your child in front of a computer screen and work them through a session, you maybe have never witnessed a session happening before. It's okay to not understand what's happening. It's okay to have questions, and it's important to ask those questions to get clarity. It's also important to recognize where your frustrations are coming from if you are a caregiver. If the provider is doing something that isn't working or you don't understand, they don't know that unless you tell them. So you can say to them, hold on a second, or you can send an email or however is most productive, but you can say, I have a question about this. What I'm noticing is my child is responding in such a way. And I feel like that's not productive. Is that something that we can work on? Same thing for providers. It's not going to be easy for a provider to all of a sudden be a tech genius. There's a reason a lot of us went into human service type jobs, because we maybe don't have those tech skills. Like, I have trouble getting people to fill in timesheets, so, because if you're doing this job as a particularly at the preschool level, you're probably more a touchy-feely kind of person, and maybe don't have the tech savvy. I once heard, this is a very gross generalization, but like, you can divide people into two groups: people that are good at Monopoly and people that are good at Trivial Pursuit. And if you're good at Monopoly, you're organized and you're functional and you're good with money and you understand real world things. If you're good at Trivial Pursuit, it literally says trivial in the title. Like, you're good about knowing stuff and you got random facts and you really, really feel things. You like things that are like colorful pies. I think a lot of preschool providers, that's where they fall. Like, we as a training exercise here a year ago, we all took a personality test, just to kind of spark a discussion at a staff meeting, and all but two of our classroom staff members or providers got the same personality. They got this, and like after the fact, we were like, well, of course we all did. Like, we're all there is a certain personality that's going to come to this, and that personality might not right away be comfortable with the remote learning aspect of it. This is not having a ton of visual feedback from an audience is hard for me. I have to imagine that this is what like a stand-up comedian feels like when it's not going well. I'm not hearing anything from anybody, and I'm just hoping this is making sense. That's going to be hard. So I have to recognize that is a part of this, and we have a system set up where at the end everyone can ask clarification, or even during. I don't want to, we can have clarification given to us. And I'm hopeful that you guys are recognizing that this is a weird situation for me too. That any of my little fidgetiness is a function of kind of an odd situation. One of the things that can abruptly end a productive session is putting motive on something that we don't really know the motive of. So, this therapist does this because they don't like me, or they don't like this, or this parent isn't following through because they don't get X, Y, and Z. And that is dangerous because oftentimes we don't really know the whole story, and we don't understand why somebody is coming to the decision they've come to, or making the conclusions that they've come to. And it can be just oftentimes a very simple misunderstanding. I love, and I try to get better all the time at using very concrete language when I'm talking to students and even adults and people. And my favorite kind of example of this is I was helping out in our kindergarten class at lunch one day. And that class, they had, they were sitting there, they were finishing, and they were working on cleaning up themselves. And they had to put away their lunch boxes, put their lunch boxes in the hallway in their cubbies. And they had these little name tags that they had to put away in a bin that was I think it was by the sink. And this one little guy who was just like, he was a funny kid. And he was one of those kids that would put one thing away and then come back over and get the next thing and put that away. And it would take forever. So I was trying to work with him on being a little more efficient. And I said, hey, bud, why don't you put away your lunchbox and your name card at the same time? And he kind of looked at me, and then he looked at my arms, he looked at his arms, and he said, Mr. Matt, my arms don't stretch that far, because he was thinking I was saying, I want you to simultaneously go in the hallway and put this in your lunchbox away and put your card by the, that's a good 20 feet away from each other. I want you to do that. And I was like, no, you're right. I don't want you to put those away at the same time. I want you to take both of them at the same time, put away your name card, and then put away your lunchbox. I mean, that's a funny example of this, but like, he could have been like, this guy, he doesn't know how arms work. Like he thinks I'm Stretch Armstrong over here, just putting things away. And it was just a very simple miscommunication. And that stuff happens between adults all the time. Because I say one thing and I mean this, and you hear it and you hear a different way. So that's what I mean by being empty of blame, is that assigning motive to something isn't always fair if we don't have any evidence to it. Does that make sense? Does that help a bit? Okay. So we can go to the next slide. So again, we want to make sure that we're validating, and I purposely had these both be the same. We want to be validating each other. This is hard, and we need to be honest with each other about how hard it is. I think one of the things that I'm finding frustrating about this whole situation we find ourselves in are the moments where I feel like, for lack of a better term, we're polishing the silverware on the Titanic occasionally. There was a particular thing that was we had to do that wasn't really directly related and wasn't a particularly time-sensitive piece of running our school. And somebody was kind of on me about getting this piece done. And I was like, yes, but I also have to make sure that, 63-year-olds are wearing masks. So I was like, I will definitely get to that other thing, but we want to make sure that we're, kind of triaging and doing the most important things first. So this is hard to, it's okay to be honest about how hard this is. When I was a kid, I struggled with a large amount of anxiety. And it looked like it manifested itself in different ways. And it was a struggle for me growing up to really kind of identify what it was. My parents, who were wonderful, would be like, what are you so scared of? Like, you're in a safe environment. What are you so scared of? And I would be like, I don't know. And this is not to be too graphic, but like I would often present as vomiting. I would, like every day before school, that would happen at least once. And I remember it wasn't until I was in high school and it was still happening. And it would happen before school. It would happen before I had to do anything social. It was just all this very, very obvious anxiety stuff. I was in the hallway bathroom and you could hear clearly what was happening to me in there. And it was supposed to be going out with friends, and I came out. And my dad it was this moment of clarity, I think, for him and me, because this worked for me. I want to make sure I'm very clear on that. This is what worked for me, is he said, this is what This is how you feel. This is what you need to do to get better. If you can do that, brush your teeth and then go do your thing, like, then that's okay. This is how your body works. And it was like a huge weight was lifted off my shoulder, that no longer did I have to worry about why was this happening? What's wrong with me? My dad was just like, this is how your body reacts to this. Okay, let's do this and let's get past it and let's go on to the next thing. Instead of me, now being anxious about being anxious, I got to just accept that I'm anxious and move forward. And like, I'm not saying that I was like cured and everything was fine. Like, let me tell you, I had a little tummy upset this morning, but I was okay because my dad had said that that's just how you are. Don't be afraid of it. Accept it. And that allowed me to move on past it. Again, I'm not saying that's a cure for anxiety or anything. That was what worked for me. And the lesson I got from that is that it was recognizing it and owning it and identifying it. So, let's say, I have gotten to the end of sessions, particularly it was my younger son and his PT sessions. His PT is fantastic, but that's hard to do remotely. We had to we're moving furniture and and he's getting tired because it's difficult. And we actually started to set aside 5 minutes at the end where he would have a drink of water and the PT and I would be like, oh my gosh, like that was crazy, right? Like, okay, what can we, this is hard. What worked this time? What didn't, and I see that as very productive. Because again, if you remember before, I talked about there's 3 different areas where we can grow. Our kids can grow, we can grow as caregivers, and we can grow as providers. That gave her and I a chance to grow as a caregiver and a provider because we were discussing what we could do differently for him, which then just generally informed me better in our daily lives. Like one of the things this is like a totally random example, but one of the things that she wanted him to work on was bear crawling more. So because we had those 5 minutes at the end, I could occasionally be like, hey, it's time to go brush our teeth. I'll bear crawl race you. And we would be able to do that. And that was able to, while that's not, part of a session or anything at all, it was a great opportunity for me to know really specifically what to carry over. And I do feel like, and this is definitely, finding a silver lining, but being able to see sessions happening and be a part of them and then carry that stuff over is a great thing. Again, I wish I would prefer that all sessions happen in person in a natural environment and, not necessarily behind plexiglass or with masks on and all that. But looking for something positive to bring out of it, I was able to have a more productive time with my son outside of his sessions, which in the long run helped him. And that never would have happened if we were both if I was just like, well, she's just doing stuff that's too hard for him. And she was like, well, he's just not trying. We took that 5 minutes to kind of break down the sessions. And I think that was helpful. Okay, so I think we can go to the next, how are we doing on time? Okay, we're doing okay. Okay, productive reflection. So I'm a big believer that honesty without any kind of compassion is just a kind of brutality. I don't believe actually in telling it like it is, because I don't think you can tell it like it is. I think you can just tell it how you're experiencing it. So what we want to do is we want to be in our focus on how we can grow. We want to look at what our role is. Really, when it comes down to it, what do we have control over? Our reaction to things and what we do. And that's where that productive reflection piece comes in. So we talked about making goals. We talked about needing goals. We've talked about making goals. We've talked about providing that feedback loop between each other. And then that feedback loop is only going to be as effective as our productive reflection. And I use that word productive again purposefully, because we're not going to get anywhere if we're just like, well, I'm just not good at this. I'm just not good at this. I can't do this. It needs to be, okay, what is it that I'm working on? How can I get there? What are the steps that I need to get there? Again, making that goal and reaching it. I think we can go to the next slide. we want to look at reflection versus deflection. Again, going back to that idea of being empty of blame. If I'm just looking at struggling sessions as one person in this isn't working as hard as they can be, and then like not voicing any concerns or any, I'm just secretly harboring these feelings of either resentment or inadequacy. We are just going to get lost, and we're not going to get anywhere. I think sometimes we lose sight of, or maybe I do, I don't know, maybe of just how intimate an experience this all is. This is as a caregiver, this is us being honest about a struggle we're having, a struggle with our whether it's our own children or children that we're caring for, who are the most important things in our lives. And we are being honest about being help. And I don't know about anybody else, but I have a hard time asking for help. And now you're asking for help with the most important thing in the world to you. So it's important to recognize the intimacy of this, particularly now we're coming into each other's homes. So being respectful and recognizing that we're going to face challenges. We can't internalize these challenges as fault in ourselves. We can look at them as potential for us to grow and to meet new goals, but we can't look at this as somebody else's fault. I can't change how anyone else is behaving. I can manage my own behavior and be as productive with my concerns as possible. When we're in, unprecedented times like this, checking in with ourselves is really important for how we are handling the stressors inherent in creating something new. That's an amazing thing that I think is easy to get lost because we're so focused on the practical of like, my kids need these services, so let's get them, that we're kind of almost reinventing the wheel at times. And we can't hate ourselves every time there's a hiccup or that there's a trip up on either end. That reflective piece of being honest, but not beating yourself up about what is working, what isn't working, is really important, again, on both ends. One of the things that I realized in years of teaching is that my classroom was never exactly the same from year to year. And that's actually like a thing that I teach now to new teachers, is like, that's good. Like you because your kids are different every year. Your classroom should be different every year. Now, again, there are broad concepts that we're going to expose everyone to, and there are goals that we want to meet, but we're not going to do it the same way all the time. I mean, heck, if you've got more than one kid, that my two kids are totally different. Like I don't understand. I don't know where they both came from. But it's important to give yourself that break of like, all right, this is hard. This is hard for everybody. What do I have control over that I can adjust and make changes towards? What feedback can I give that will be helpful? And again, I can't stress enough how important all of this being productive and aware of other people's feelings are. Like, just again, saying this thing stinks isn't necessarily a helpful piece of information. You want to say like, this is where we are struggling, this is what I need to work on. And giving yourself the permission to struggle with something and be reflective on it is so important. We can go to the next slide, please. Things that we can do is, cut ourselves some slack. We want to make sure that we are recognizing, like we said at the beginning, for caregivers, this is not ever a role you necessarily intended to play. My wife and I, when we were, even before our oldest son was born, like we kind of had a discussion, like, We want to be this kid's parents. We don't want to be his teacher. Like, that's literally something we said to each other. So I think we jinxed us. So I'm sorry. I think that was our fault, because now we've ended up as his teacher. But like, because there are definitely similarities between being a parent and being a teacher and being a coach and being a therapist. Like, there's similarities there, but there are important differences as well. So recognize that this is, as a caregiver, this is not necessarily a role you ever intended to play, and allow yourself time to grow into it. Providers, also cut yourself some slack. This is not a scenario which you ever trained for. So, strive for progress, not perfection. I love again, another concept that I love is, don't let perfect get in the way of good. If you spend all your time trying to create this perfect Zoom environment, you might be missing out on the opportunities to make progress. Like, that's really what we're looking for, is progress. It's a long haul. So we want to make sure that we're just getting a little bit better each time. Trying to create and find communities that are productive and supportive are important. Don't let yourself get pulled into some of the unproductive, negative thinking that puts all the blame on someone else. It's like, well, I could do this, but his providers don't know anything, they don't care, or I could do this, but the caregivers, they're not doing their part, that's not helpful to anyone. Recognize what you can do, what changes you can make, and work about making progress on them. Can we go to the next slide, please? So, putting it all together, what I hope people can do with this is use these concepts as like a lens to look through all of the issues that you're coming to. Take each step on their own. Okay, so we're recognizing the fact that it's important that we have a goal. If we don't have a goal, then we can't make a plan to get anywhere. What's like the old if you don't have a goal, it doesn't matter which direction you go. It doesn't matter which way you take. That's not the saying. I can't remember the saying. I'm panicking because I can't remember the saying, but we're gonna forget it. Establish that you need goals. Start creating goals based on realistic expectations, realistic access to materials, realistic assessment of your own skill sets. I joked about fine motors not being my skill set. Like, when I was a teacher, I would struggle coming up with art projects because I was like, these are all so hard for me. So that was something I really had to work on. And my art projects weren't necessarily as good as someone else's, but they were productive enough that the children were able to gain something from them. So we know that we need goals. We need to have those goals be meaningful and productive, and we want to make sure that we are going through our steps and our lens. We want to be realistic with our goals. We want to be realistic about what we can do. We want to make sure that we're being solution oriented, that it's not just about what our problems are. Our problems are there. What can we do to address these problems? I think, in doing some managerial stuff here, one of the places I see in general, people, kind of trip up is we meet, okay, there's a problem. We meet, we have a plan about that problem, and we start doing that. Then we start executing the plan, and we're all excited about the plan. If we never check back in with how the plan is going, then we're just going to end up in the same spot again. There needs to be this kind of like regular check-in with like, okay, are we getting where we want to go? Is this like we said, what are our goals? What are our behaviors? Do our behaviors match our goals? We want to make sure that we're being reflective and finding these productive solutions and being honest with each other, and ultimately creating teams. I love teams. It's very hard for me because, like I said before, I have trouble asking for help. But I would not say I was the best teacher that was ever here. There are way better teachers out there, but I became a better teacher because of the teams I worked with. I was able to be exposed to people who had a different teaching style or had different experiences, and those added up to me being able to kind of absorb the things that they were teaching me and adapt them to my own style as a teacher or as a manager. And I think that's an important thing we can do here. You know, I think, again, trying to find silver lining, providers getting to see how parents interact with their kids gives a lot to our understanding of how this child reacts to different kinds of relationships and different kinds of personalities. And like I said before, being a parent, being able to be a part of, or a caregiver, being able to be part of these sessions was hugely influential in how I was able to communicate and work with my sons on their various needs. And you know, the ultimate goal being, once we have all of these opportunities, while we would rather not have to be remote, and we would rather not have sessions not happen in person, when we hopefully eventually get back to it, we'll all have a better understanding of our children and what they're going through, the work that the providers go in, the work that the parents are putting in. You know, I think as providers, it's again, I have to tell another story. When before my first son was born, you know, we did the whole thing where they let you tour the hospital where the baby's going to be born, and you can see, you know, we went by the nursery where the nurses were changing diapers, and they were like very efficient, and they all seemed perfectly lovely. They weren't stopping and cooing over each of the babies. They were, you know, getting a baby in front of them, changing the diaper, making sure they're good, and then, you know, getting them onto the next one. And somebody who hadn't worked in a daycare for 10 years at that point said, I can't believe how, you know, they're not, you know, they thought it felt kind of cold. And I want to be like, dude, you never had to change 30 diapers in 10 minutes before. Like you got to get that done. You know, it is important to have that perspective of the other side for both of us. You know, as who I was as a teacher before I became a parent was different than who I was as a teacher after I became a parent. Who I was as a teacher after I became a parent changed again when we recognized my son's needs. You know, like all of these things just made me change as I grew. You know, I'm a huge comic book nerd. I don't know if you can tell. And Superman was always my favorite. And watching the scenes of, you know, for anybody that doesn't know, you know, Superman gets put in a rocket and sent to Earth by his parents. Watching a Superman movie the first time after having a kid, I was like, don't do that to your baby. It's a different experience. I came out of it with a different experience. So I'm hoping, or a different experience that gave me a different view. I'm hoping that all of us can come out of this with using this experience to have a different view, be a little bit more patient with our providers, be a little bit more patient with our caregivers, and recognize that there are a huge amount of challenges on either end, but we can both learn something from each other. Can we go to the next slide, please? You know, so this is my I think my last, you know, mantra is no one has ever come out of emergency and thought, thank God I panicked. Like, you know, like I think this qualifies as an emergency situation. We need to be adaptable. Communication and preparation are key. And so is a certain level of staying calm. You know, most of the people that I have seen that are successful as caregivers and as providers are the people that are able to roll with the punches, not in a way that they don't react or don't do something, but they don't react emotionally, and they don't panic going into a situation. Like I say this at work here all the time. Like, you know, like you don't want a doctor that's like, oh my goodness, what's happening here? You know, like you don't want somebody panicking in a situation that's helping you. By following our steps that we talked about, and being adaptable, communicating and being prepared, hopefully we can come out of this with our children making progress and all of us learning a little bit more about how to best serve the communities that we work in. I think that might be the last slide. I can't remember off the top of my head. Yeah, so those are basically my final thoughts. You know, we want to use these principles as a lens. Again, I'm not saying that these are the be all end all. It's just a good way that for me to I like steps and I like a process, and that's kind of been how I've evaluated this process for me, both personally and professionally. And that's the end of that. So I hope people have questions or comments. I'll let you guys kind of take over there.
Thank you so much, Matt. So at this point, we would like to open it up to questions. If you do have a question and you want to put it in the chat box, feel free to do so now. If you are on the phone and would like to ask a question, you can unmute yourself by pressing *6, I believe. That should unmute your phone. And while we are waiting for those to come in, I guess first, Helen, have you received anything directly to you in the chat box as far as questions?
I have not.
Okay. So I have one that will maybe get us started. And Matt and Steve, I'm going to ask if you have any ideas or comments in addressing this, to feel free to chime in too. So Matt, you talked, you opened your presentation about talking about being flexible and knowing limitations, and then you went on to give us really practical advice and perspective on how, as an organization and as a parent, you have handled some of these challenges. But I know that we have parents who at the same time are saying, yes, but my child needs this, or, you know, I feel like my child is not getting what they're needing. So I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about how do you find that balance between knowing limitations, being flexible, while still flushing out and meeting the needs of the children that you serve.
No, that's a great question, and I hope I didn't give the impression that all of this is easy and going to be solved just by doing 4 things. Like I hope that's not the impression I get. It's more trying to find a productive process, and always I want parents to advocate for what their children need, because again, going back to that point that, you know, as the caregiver, you are the expert on your child, so there is a way to be both open-minded, but also what's the word I'm looking for? That's right. Having perseverance, and not being, you can stand up for yourself in a way that isn't necessarily aggressive and off-putting, but is also, this is what my child needs and this is what they will get. And I think probably maybe some of the parent advocates can talk better about like the processes that might come into play if you are getting pushback. If people are not acting in good faith, then that is the issue. And I probably presented in a way that everyone was kind of hopefully acting in good faith. If there is something that comes up like that, there are definitely mechanisms in place to get support. Whether it's the district or the county isn't helping you get what you want, then absolutely we need to do that. I just want to be cognizant of the fact that if something doesn't exist yet, we have to make it first and then do it. Does that make sense? Is that? I don't know if Steve, you have anything to add to that, or if I'm really answering that question. I'm not sure.
I think so, yes. Steve, feel free to jump in if you have anything to add.
Yeah, I would, you know, I'm reflecting on, my son's 23 now, and he was diagnosed with autism at 2 years and 8 months old. So that was a very raw period for me and for my wife in our life. You know, it's the kind of thing you don't. I always tell people it wasn't in the brochure of parenthood. I never thought I'd have a kid with a disability. I never thought about that. So I bring that up because coming from that perspective, I think it's such a raw time emotionally for parents, the early education, EI, CPSE. So I think I would, you know, I agree with everything that Matt said today, and the idea of communication is huge for success in so many things, and certainly in education. So I'm sitting there thinking, it's easy to hear the words personally and professionally, like you know, just communicate with the provider or the teacher, you know. But if we're not, if we as parents are not even if we're not objective yet about what those needs are, then we're in a tough spot. So I think probably the easiest first thing I think is almost all of us make a connection with someone at our kids' preschool or in our home with the providers that have been coming in, like in a pre-COVID state. So I think the first thing is to kind of identify who that is in your child's provider network, and then talk with them. So even if you're having a problem or you're perceiving a problem with the speech therapy, let's say, and you don't like the speech therapist, but maybe you're talking with the social worker or the classroom teacher or the assistant director, or whoever you've connected with, I think you need to go to that person, text them, email them, call them, whatever. And I think that's a good balance of getting some grounded information from a professional that you have some inkling of trust with, some kind of gut feeling. So I think that's just one little step, I think, about how to move forward with something in terms of, as Matt said, it's the most important part of your life, or one of the most important parts if you have more than one child. So I think that's one thing. I say, hey, talk with your friends and your family that you trust, but be cautious about that because they're not always there. My experience is that they're not that well informed. You know, over the years with my son, who's doing quite well, thank God, you know, there are times where relatives would say, are you sure he's got autism? So, you know, that isn't really helpful on an emotional level, and it's not helpful on a practical level. So whatever's going on with your kid, whatever their needs are, family, I think, is helpful, and friends are helpful to a certain degree, but they're not going to be clinically helpful. And if we want our kids to grow, as Matt talks about goals, we have to have some clinical approach to how we're going to do this. So, so I don't know if that answered the question, but I guess if I had to dumb all that down into one sentence, find a provider, even at a new school or when this is new to you, that you feel good about, and start talking with them first about, gee, I'm concerned about this. What's going on with my kid? Does that help? Was that clear enough?
Yes, thank you both so much. And I'm checking my chat now. I don't have anything. Helen, have you had anything come in?
I have a nice comment that says, love the panic quote. It speaks volumes. Love your realistic and human approach to this crisis we find ourselves in.
Thank you very much. I do like the panic quote too. I think that all the time. One thing I just thinking.
Rosado, hi. I loved your presentation. I thought you were fantastic. My colleague is sitting next to me, and she's not on the screen, but she's listening, and we're laughing and discussing. Oh my gosh, that's right on point. And I related to almost everything that you said. And I think about some of my staff members and the PowerPoint. Is that something that you're willing to share with those that are here?
Absolutely.
Those phrases that you use and some of the statements that you've made are powerful, very powerful. And it just gives people a different perspective. I just really, really enjoyed listening to you present it too. But if that's something that you're able to share with the presenters or the participants here, I know I personally would love it. I'm sure a lot of folks would as well.
Yes, I'm happy. So they have a copy of that, because I wasn't even running that. They were running it. So I'm fine with sharing with whoever. I appreciate your comments. It means a lot to me to hear that. I also want to be clear that, like, I'm pretty much just distilling information I've gotten from people throughout the year. So I don't want to take too much credit for for any of it, but I appreciate it very much. Thank you.
And what I will do when I send everyone the evaluation and recording of this training, I'll include as an attachment the PowerPoint.
Great.
And I'm not sure, we'll stay open for questions a little longer. We had planned for 2 hours when there was 2 speakers, but since it was only Matt, oh, don't apologize. But since it's only Matt, I don't want to force it to go the full 2. I feel like we've got a ton of fabulous information that people will walk away from and be happy with. So I'll leave the chat open for another couple minutes, and we don't get any questions, and I think we're all set.
And Helen, I am correct that to unmute from a phone is *6?
Yes.
Okay.
Hi, this is Carrie Banks. I'm sorry to break in, but I'm having trouble with chat. I can't post anything in it except privately to one person. And I don't even have a question, but I run the Brooklyn Public Library Services for children and teens with disabilities. And so we have lots of resources, things like that for families if you're interested. But Matt, I just wanted to thank the group for sharing the PowerPoint slides. As someone with a learning disability, I have dyslexia and dysgraphia, it is so much easier for me to have that additional support. So I wanted to thank you for that and for the closed captioning, because I've been doing a lot of webinars recently, as you can imagine, and so many of them are not accessible in those ways. So thank you for that. And Matt, thank you for just the really exciting and wonderful information that I'll share with our families.
Well, thank you very much. It's my pleasure. I feel very lucky to be able to talk to everybody today and to be in the position I'm in. So thank you very much.
Hi, I also am having trouble with posting the chat. I'm a family court judge in Warren County, and I too want to congratulate you on a lot of these comments are applicable across the board to just people in general in their daily lives. It's wonderful. And I was just wondering if you could give, what is the advice you're giving to families who have a child who lives in 2 households? They share custody, and one parent might be the go-to for the educational piece, and the other parent is maybe a little bit more reluctant. I heard Steve say earlier that, you know, when you're in that raw stage of early development, it's just so hard for these parents to get on the same page, and timing is critical to get these kids those services. Do you have any advice that, you know, you as providers can give to me to help get people going and down the path to get the kids what they need?
Can I start with this one, Matt?
Yep.
Okay. Thank you for those comments. So let me share from similar to Matt, let me share a quick story. So my denial period was at its worst before Matthew got diagnosed. So from the age of 2 years to 2 years and 8 months, so that 8-month period, I was a house husband at the time. Mary makes more money than me then and still does. So we wanted someone to be home, and I stayed home with him for 4 years. And I thought I was a progressive dad, but my denial was so strong. I remember when anybody, including my wife, said anything to me about there might be something wrong, he's not talking or whatever. I remember thinking and saying phrases like, there's nothing wrong with my boy. And that sounded to me, well, now it sounds to me very traditional and not very progressive. But I'm such an emotional person. That was kind of where I had to go. What helped me come out of it was when the doctor, the developmental pediatrician, said the words, he has autism. And what also helped was she gave us some information and suggested we read up on certain things that there could be something done to help him. And to answer to your question, like in a split household, I think that, when I try to support families and parents, and when I do both advocacy and I do emotional support for what it's worth, I just feel like I can't control, and Matt referenced this earlier, I can't control what the parents are going to do, whether they're split up or not, and whether someone's in a period of denial or whatnot. What I can control is what information I share with them. And let me back up a quick second. There was one family member before Matthew turned 2, the month before, who said something to me and said, are you concerned about him? Because he's not talking. And I don't remember my reaction, what I said. I'm sure it was not pleasant, or it was stone silence. But when I think back on that, even though that didn't motivate me to want to get help for Matthew, I'm grateful for that family member. And I'm grateful that someone took that risk to share with me, even though it wasn't the right time for me. It didn't matter. So I think the best thing we can do as providers is just give people factual information, and challenge them compassionately to look at what is actually happening. So we don't have to say things like, do you think something's wrong with him? You can say, I'm not an expert, but I know a lot of kids that have started talking around 2. It just might be something you want to think about, because I don't hear him saying anything. And for the record, someone, sometimes we just don't see it. The doctor pointed out when she diagnosed him, she said, he doesn't point to anything. And I'm like, yes, he does. She said, no, he does not. I said, he just pointed to that toy. And she said, no, she said it nicer than this, but very clearly. She said, he took you by the hand, walked you over to the toy box, and pushed your hand towards the toy. And I was fascinated, because I felt when she said that, I realized that the last 2.5 years, that's exactly what he did in our house. And I felt like, are you living in my house? Do you have cameras in my house? Like, how did you know that? I didn't say that. I was pretty pissed off at her, but I still got the information. So factual things that we can point out, I think, are going to be helpful. So I'm sorry, that's kind of a long response. I don't know if Matt wants to add to that, or if that helped your question, if I answered that.
I think it's very helpful. And, again, I'm not trained in these fields. And what I try to do is direct the parties together to go to the point person, which I start with the pediatrician, to have a joint meeting. And I have to court order it many times, because people are in denial. And, so if I can court order it and at least they hear it one time, then hopefully, even if they need a second opinion, no problem with that, but you might hear it 2 times, and then, hopefully get them across that bridge towards, having a healthy, happy life with their child, and celebrating all the things that their child is capable of learning and doing.
Yes, and I would add to that, Your Honor, that if there's any family support programs in the county, and there probably are, and there's usually in different realms through the Office of Mental Health, Office of OPWDD, but family, my role at Northern Rivers is, as Kristen said at the beginning, is a family peer advocate. So the idea to this position is you have to be a parent of a child with a disability. So the notion of it's like having an immediate support group if you get a good peer advocate. So if you're familiar with these organizations or these programs, great. If you're not, I'd be happy to email with you or speak on the phone with you. If you just reach out to Helen, I guess would be the easiest thing. I don't want to take anyone's space
Are the
here.
peer advocates based in the schools, or they're in the community is what you're saying?
Really in the community. Yeah, they're in different agencies in the communities. Yeah, but they can, we can really, it's a non-threatening role. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
And
it's
we
wonderful.
Yeah, so we can definitely help you find those. Northern Rivers has some up in that county as well. So
Okay.
we just find my name on the website or communicate with Helen and she'll connect us, whatever. Okay.
I will do that. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Matt, did you want to add to anything there?
No, I think that was perfect. Thank you, Steve.
Okay, Helen, do we have anything else that came in through chat?
We've got nothing in the chat.
Okay, and is there anyone else attending either by phone or by computer who isn't able to access the chat feature, who wants to unmute and ask any questions? You can feel free to unmute yourself and do that.
One last comment that came through is thanks for the perspective. When we all work together, it only helps the outcome. Thanks for the honesty.
Absolutely, yes. And I want to thank everyone who has shared their own personal stories with the group. You know, I think that is one of the best ways to learn and figure out how to navigate these difficult times. So I want to thank you all who have felt comfortable to do that.
You will be getting an email from me within the next couple of days with an evaluation for this training. As Kristen said at the beginning, and I will reiterate, we read every single evaluation. It helps us decide what trainings we want to put on in the future based off of the comments that we receive. So keep your eye out for that. And thank you all so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much.